Welcome back. Happy New Year, 2018. By a show of hands,
It's not 2017 yet.
I swear 2018 couldn't have come fast enough. And I know it's just arbitrary that the years change, but something truly changed inside of me. I was like, we made it. We made it. I wasn't sure it was going to happen for any of us in this room. I thank you all so much for returning. Welcome to East Lake Park. Thank you so much to East Lake Park for donating the space. And who's our contact here? Ashley, is it Tina or?
Tina and Margaret Spicer.
Awesome. So if you have any time, we'll introduce you. They're wonderful. They really stepped up and opened the space up to us when we had to move last minute to this space. So thank you all so much for being here. How many people feel like 2018 is off to a good start? Like, raise your hand. Like you have deodorant on. That kind of hand raise, right? And if you don't, that's cool.
Everyone's like
Women's, right?
apprehensive. We're still early.
Yeah, I saw that. They're like, oh, the jury's out. Yeah,
Not even
yeah.
done with January.
Daily things are happening. I'm not sure. I'm clinging on by a thread. I'll give it over to Jeff.
Well, so for instance, we've been very reflective as part of our practice over the time that we've had together, and something that we've landed on that we really wanted to invest in and put some thought in and bring into the space in terms of sharing with you all, because this is in large part our learning as well, is the concept of unlearning. It seems like, in terms of like things that became buzzwords in 2017, like unlearning seemed to pop up in a lot of different places, which said to us that it was very accessible and people were interested in at least somewhat, grappling with this term and what it meant and how it would be helpful to have these conversations that sometimes are a little difficult around things like racial equity. And so as part of that, and coming together and thinking through, how can we provide a little bit more clarity and offer something up, we came up with some of these terminologies and can we see this? Can you all see this? It's better to move these.
We'll move this out of the way, just like, and then we'll bring it back.
Here, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to put it on the back wall where everyone can see it and reference back to them. So, we have these two pieces that we wanted to offer up that help us understand this term a little bit better. Not necessarily definitive, but something that's emerging as part of this process. And so we wanted to share that with you all and allow that to anchor how we open the space with each other. So, Mary.
Last week I was fortunate enough to spend, on behalf of Insight, 2 days at the Race Forward racial equity training, which was one of the best trainings I've taken and been a part of and participated in around racial equity. And what was really exciting is they have this idea called choice points. I don't know if you've heard of this, a choice point. It's a moment where you get to make a decision, a thoughtful, like you're going along a path, and then you have a choice point. We can go this way, or we can go straight, right? And so I was thinking, as we were framing today's conversation, before we introduce Maria, well, you would know Maria and actually introduce them, but turn it over to them. How do we integrate, and the conversation that came up at Race Forward is, how do we integrate unlearning as a choice point? How do we identify the moment where we have a moment of unlearning? And how do we make that a moment that we can say, oh, we're not able to move forward until we integrate a moment of unlearning. And so we had like 2 days just talking about this unlearning idea as a place that allows us to explore rather than makes us feel like inadequate, I don't know. So I don't know becomes a moment of departure for something new. It becomes, in essence, a choice point. So what we wanted to, I'm just going to kind of talk about the definition that we came up with at Race Forward. Generously engaging with belief systems and lived experiences other than our own present unlearning, and to present unlearning opportunities. And so we introduced this idea of the what if it's true last, I think in 2017 in that time. And this is really what this is about. We engage in something, we have to have a moment that says, I'm hearing something that's different than my own experience. What if it's true? And that is the first moment we can begin to unlearn. We begin to engage with something other than our own experience. And so we wanted to, do you want to take the second part?
Yeah, and so part of that, so if part of, for lack of a better term, capitalizing on an unlearning opportunity, then how do we know we've gotten everything out of that? How can we start to name that? And we're offering up these three these 3 bullet points. And so an unlearning opportunity allows a moment to identify, and if you'll notice, we have a little line in the word faulty.
Very Judith Butler.
Right? Because we recognize it could be a problematic term, but identify faulty learning. So in this moment, in this unlearning opportunity, is there something we can identify that's faulty within our own understanding and learning? 2, can we identify where and how we learned that particular thing? And 3, based off of that understanding and history, can we situate the ideology? And then decide, is this something we want to continue to hold on to, or is this better left? And so that's something we're starting with and want to offer up and see if this is a tool that's helpful and engage you all with it.
And we want to bring up that this is a work in progress. This is something that every time we meet, we think about unlearning. This is not something we're like, this is the definition that we've come up with, and a year from now we're going to be using this definition. I think if we do it well, we will continue to unlearn that definition and come up with new ideas about what unlearning really is. And so we want to invite us today as a moment to get us back into the room to partner with 3 people that you don't know well. And I know that's hard because some of us know everyone in the room pretty well. But I think there are people in here we may not know as well by degrees. So if you can generously, we're going to ask you to use your body a little bit today, right? You have to move. I see Laura like, oh man. No, she wasn't actually doing that. But can you choose 3 people to get into a group with, and this will be your community of practice for today. So if you just want to, thanks Liz, if you want to play, just find 3 people. I can do that 1, 2, 3 people. 3 people in a group. So with this new mini community of practice, but communities of practice often start in mini moments. I'm in the middle of developing a community of practice around racial equity, and we're starting with 3 people. So, you know, it'll get bigger. With this new community of practice, we want to offer you for the next 5 minutes to think about a time, and really we want to keep it in the last like 2 weeks to 6 months. So a very recent experience where you might think of a moment where you experienced or are experiencing unlearning, and how that's begun to inform your work. In any way, this can be really vulnerable, or it can just be really practical. I was moving this direction, somebody said something, we moved a different direction. It could be that. We want to encourage you to go a little deeper, but we want you to start thinking about the unlearning process and what that means for you. There's no right way to do it. We're just asking you to be inspired by what's up there, and then also to build it. To come up, to disagree with some of those points maybe, but maybe to offer some new things that we might put on there by the end of the day. Also, just with your community of practice, talking about your unlearning experiences of recent past. You only have about 5 or 7 minutes for this. No pressure. My goal is this where it's this. I moved right.
Just move it back up.
Sorry, no, I just got a little share. Just set it. Sorry about that.
Currently, I'm an opportunity. Something that I think is going to make a difference, not just for issues, but for the community. How issues are problems. And it's still the opportunity is to give us the labor and also because and so basically I'm trying to do full-time jobs. The jobs are very rare. I had a conversation, so it's not a decision that I have made. So I had a conversation with my husband this morning because he feels like it is a job and I don't know how to accomplish the work that I want to do without making it as much as I'm giving it right now. The fact of the matter is that work that I hear is and that's not what it really is. It's just something else. I either have to or
So 2 or 3 more minutes to make sure everybody's been heard. So we'll do 1 more minute, and then we're going to do a share out.
I think that's a real
What also realized that like because of like with like oppression, like certainly like family design for these systems like very far to avoid conflict that only scientists
and it's a very philosophical and so
actually, could you share that? So we'll meet back in the middle.
and just understanding that
We've changed our perspectives already, which is why we move around the space. So before we transition into today with Maria and Ashley, can we just share out some of the things that we've heard? And actually, I just want to start with Terry. Can you just share what you I just caught the tail end of it.
We were talking about kind of where we learned this behavior, and I said, I don't even know that I was old enough to know that I was learning anything. It was just constantly present. So.
Yeah. What other things, and we'll hear something from each group, so we'll go around and something from each group. So we'll just move this way toward Alex and Stephen.
Ooh, okay, so I shared that I actually was in a bar hanging out with some friends a couple months ago, and someone, I don't even remember the conversation, but someone said, nobody knows the trouble I've seen. And I told Colleen that with no thought, I don't even know where this came from. Like the song popped out of my mouth. And then I thought, why am I singing this song? Like, where did this come from? Why is this in my brain? Why do I think that I should be someone who like has the right to sing this song? It was a very odd moment to have that sort of, I think this resonated with me thinking about like, oh, it was a faulty learning. How and where did I learn that? It feels like it was something that I picked up in childhood. And then to situate the ideology.
Yeah.
It was an odd, interesting, good bar.
Reflective practice. Okay. Anything else in the group before we move forward? I just want to make sure if there's any.
I think one of the things for me, and Alex and Stephen, anybody knows me has heard this before, but I always believe that Maya Angelou saying, "I would give nothing for my journey," is a strong and deep saying. So I'm not going to unlearn my journey. I really hate the term. I think it denies everything that you learned. To say you now need to unlearn things. But I think to evolve, but you have to be able to hold on to what you learned on your journey and then evolve it along. So I find that term wrong.
Unuseful. Unuseful.
Totally unuseful.
Okay, great. And moving this way? Or Stephen, did you want to add, or you came in late? Okay, great.
We're going to opt out because they were super personal.
Okay, great. Is that in agreement for the whole group?
I mean, I can offer one super personal too, but I think I'll be doing this the rest of my life. But in terms of like faulty learnings, I think a relationship with conflict that is one of aversion, or seeing conflict as something that must be avoided at all costs, and then just seeing how that was learned in a family environment. Also, it has some cultural context to that, and then what it does to my ability to live the life that I want to live. And so I've been just like consciously choosing these moments where I see I'm going to do something that is going to create conflict, or I see conflict coming, and just retraining my brain and my whole body to say, this is an opportunity to see something that I couldn't see before, this is an opportunity to grow, it's an opportunity to fix, or to at least, you know, come out with a different perspective. But it's really hard, like your whole body wants to do something very different. So just that practice of like showing up for something that doesn't feel good.
Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Screw.
I think if I had to summarize, maybe we talked a lot about like assumptions, or like the desire to like get something done, and both of those two things can be roadblocks, and or like are full of like learned practices that aren't necessarily the way to go. So just because of like I relate a lot, like family, or like just how you grew up, or like working on a deadline causes you to miss a lot of nuanced things, or to be like paying attention to like what's in the space. So that was
kind of like we need to slow down to override our own defaults.
Yeah.
Did I summarize it okay?
And then our last one.
I think one of the things that I'm reflecting on from our time together is how it's interesting that a process of unlearning can be really destabilizing when it's like an assumption that you rested on that like made your world okay. But it can also be really empowering when those assumptions that you're trying to unlearn are actually things, you know, that you have internalized that are holding you back.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's an interesting sort of, I think those two have to play together, you know, through this kind of process.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you so much for sharing. Hi, nice to see you. I'm glad you made it. Thank you all so much for sharing and sharing personally, also sharing disagreement, which I think is also really important to say this doesn't work for me or I find it unuseful. But people that were able to kind of go deeper, right, to find places that you're like, oh, from childhood I learned these things and I have to rethink them or evolve past them. I like that idea, that kind of conversation between unlearning and evolution. So thank you all so much. We wanted to open this with this. One, just to bring you back into conversation with each other. So we could start just in that place where we talk to people we don't always know. And with that, I want to actually hand it over to Ashley and Maria, who are going to talk today. And they've been working for the last couple of weeks. I can't see you, so I'm just going to do this. So, so I'll hand it over to both of them now. So thank you all so much. And yeah, we'll come back here at 10 till.
For being here today. Who has never stepped foot at East Lake Park? This is your first time in this building.
Oh, first time.
In this building. First time in the building and the park? Okay. Who's driven by it? Yeah, who's driven by it? Does anybody know why East Lake Park is so significant to Phoenix? Anybody have some guesses?
It's the area that African Americans were forced to live in because of rules that we had for decades here in the United States, and specifically here in Phoenix. And I don't really remember the transition of how this became a park.
Yeah.
Or maybe it was always a park. I knew it had a swimming pool.
See? So one of the things with Insight, one of the things that Maria and I will talk about today with working with communities is really grounding yourself before you do the work to understand the place that you're stepping foot on. Not just before what is now home to a lot of historical African American events for Phoenix, but even before that when we talk about the Native and Indigenous people. So I encourage you to take a deep dive into East Lake. We just put on a really beautiful March for Black Women last September, where 300 people, plus all these black women, don't know where they came from, but they live in Phoenix, stormed the park for the day, and it was really, really beautiful. So wonderful things happen in this space, and to look back into the history is really significant. So what we're going to talk about is working with community, and not just if you're in this space working with this community, but all communities today. So I'm Ashley. I'm one of the consultants with Michael and Joe and Mary, and I've been working for quite some time in the last couple of weeks with Maria. Do you want to introduce you? I think
I know most people. I'm Maria Jackson. I'm an institute professor at ASU, the Herberger Institute for Design and the Arts, and the College of Public Service and Community Solutions. And I'm a guest facilitator.
Guest facilitator. That's what that's today. So one of the things when we were looking at the framework so Maria and I work a lot in communities, and that the topic is so broad. If we wanted to, so what could we sort of puncture and discuss with you today? So we started riffing on a whiteboard of when we go into community, what is a sort of set of considerations that we have when we go and work with community. And we started thinking on this whiteboard, well, before we even walk into the community, we have to start with ourselves, right? So one of the things that came up instantly was checking our preconceived notions of a space, checking our preconceived notions of a community. And the other two that came out as sort of that self-reflection before you come into a community would be the power of self, of yourself in a historical and present context, walking into the space, right? Where do you come from? Where are you coming in? How are you entering into the space? And then also just checking in with yourself before you walk into the community. What's going on with you in your personal life? What are you sort of bringing into, you know, that baggage of every relationship you're going to start? What are you bringing into the space? When we talk about before you even begin working, right? What is the entering into the space? Anything else that came out of that first riff of self?
No, just a little bit of background. We were trying to distill with each other what do we believe to be good practice in
different experiences, but many years of working in different places. When you're trying to do the right thing, what are some things that come to mind that you feel are kind of not negotiable? That you have to, if you're going to do your work well, you have to consider these things. So that's how we ended up with this short list that Ashley's describing.
Yeah, and then that sort of entering and then being working and then even in the exiting, right? So how do you leave the community in a healthy and equitable way, right? There's equitable, healthy ways to leave a community that you've been working with. And those sets of conditions and considerations that we talked about, so that's 3, right? So checking your preconceived notions, the power of self and historical and present context. Checking in with yourself, where are you at, right? What's going on? What do you bring into the table? But then when we start looking at your approach to the community, acknowledging that communities are not clean slates, right? We're not coming in to fix something, that communities have their own leaders and history and context and positives and negatives, etc. They're not sort of this clean slate that we can just come in and dump whatever we'd like onto. And then also in doing the work, recognizing not only the leaders, but the invisible leaders of a community. So something for me, I come from a youth development background, and I always see the young people in every community as invisible leaders, because we don't think about young people when we walk in to do community work. And they're not the only ones, right? There may be folks who, I think about Eastlake, there are very visible community members of Eastlake, right? And rest in peace, Bishop Thomas, and what we've heard on the news. But that is a visible leader, right? But there are so many invisible ones, so digging deep and doing the homework in that community. And then the sort of last one that came to our thinking was looking for the assets and not the deficits. So instead of going into a community and looking at all the broken windows, instead looking for what are the things that are working or what are the things that people are proud of, what are the assets this community has, what are those resources, instead of coming at it from a negative lens.
Yeah, I think the idea with the last one is not to turn a blind eye to real challenges in places, but to have a balanced approach where that's not the only thing that you see, but you see other things too.
So out of all of those 6, once we stared at them on the whiteboard, we realized that every single one of them could be like a 3-day workshop, just to do one. So we thought today we would do some reflective practice exercises and some writing and some group talk about checking your preconceived notions, right? So it's great that Mary and Joe sort of set us up with this unlearning, these things that are here in the back that sometimes we forget about until we walk into a space and then we actually realize we're doing damage, even though we may have all the best intentions in the world. So Maria's going to bring us into our reflective practice and give some origins to this activity that we're going to do today.
So this practice technique thing, it doesn't have a formal name per se. I usually call it a dump, and I think Alex and Selena are going to find it familiar because we've done it in class. But I learned it when I was a graduate student from a professor who was an anthropologist that worked really closely with epidemiologists and had to go into many different kinds of communities around the world and try to understand them in a way that she could help an epidemiologist understand how to track disease. And in doing that, wanted to do work in a way that she didn't get in her own way. And part of it had to do with getting really clear about what preconceived notions you bring into an environment. So I learned it as a graduate student, and then when I started teaching, I started using it when I was teaching at UCLA with architecture students. When many years ago, I taught the ethnographic component of an architecture studio. And in these studios, the architecture students were working in public housing in Los Angeles. And and many of them didn't have experience with communities that were public housing communities, and they had a lot of preconceived notions about what those communities were like, how they operated, and ideas that can actually get in the way of them doing their best work, and can even be damaging if they didn't account for them somehow. So the exercise, which we're going to ask you guys to do, and you may have a reflective practice that is similar to this. So if you do, when it comes time to talk about it, we'd love to hear. We don't presume that you don't do something like this already, but if you don't, it might be useful to you. And so it's very simple, and it requires a piece of paper. So
Will it bother your camera if I
I'll try not to marry that.
Okay. When people are writing, talking on front, I cut that anyway. Yeah.
So anyway, just to do due diligence, the person who taught me this method is someone named Susan Scrimshaw. Dr. Susan Scrimshaw. You know her? Yeah, I saw her. So she was a professor, I was a student of hers, Dr. Susan Scrimshaw, and she used to do, she authored something called Rapid Assessment Procedures, which is the work that she did with epidemiologists. She worked with the UN and with several international organizations around public health issues. So Susan Scrimshaw is the person who is responsible for this method, and I hope I can do justice, but wonderful person. So here's the direction. So you need to end up with 3 columns. Okay. So take your piece of paper and make a line, and then make another line. So you have 3 columns. Very good. Perfect. A+ gold star. Really is. And in the first column, without censoring yourself, and you don't have to show this to anybody, this is just your personal moment. Without censoring yourself, write down what was triggered for you when you knew you were going to come to this place. Just any, and it can be positive, it can be negative, it can be whatever it was. Just account for it. When you knew that you were coming here, what did it make you think of? Just take a few minutes to do that without censoring yourself. Okay. So in the second column, consider the things that you wrote down and think about what's the source. So whatever that triggered for you, what's the source? Is it personal experience here? Is it something somebody told you? Is it something you heard on the media? Is it something you made up? Just think about for each of the things that you listed, what's the source? Okay. And in the last column, that's your so what column. So when you look at your assertion and you look at your source, what does it make you feel? Or what's the so what? What's your feeling or your conclusion? And it could be many things.
So that was the 3rd time I think I've heard safety, right? When it comes to East Lake. And when we think about that second column of source, when you think about why it may feel unsafe to put your car in the parking lot versus the street, or to do something after dark in this particular place, what is the source of that feeling of unsafety? So going back to when you had the prompt, is it something you read? Is it an old memory that triggered you? Is it something that happened to you? What is the source of feeling like doing that particular thing would make you unsafe? Where does that source come from? that column too. Or maybe you have another something in column 2 that you want to share.
For yourself, what, to kind of just truth test what the assumption is. Because when you think about the source, to your point, Liz, sometimes it's exactly what you just said, Terry, which is you had experience here and it's firsthand. Sometimes you hear it in the media, that could be the case. Sometimes you might be making it up, which is what you're seeing. And it's just important to be aware of that as you continue to consider how you engage. Yep. So again, just a device that you may find useful in the future or not. I happen to think it's worth using and encourage people that I work with when we're going into places that are not familiar, especially. Although sometimes it's interesting to even do it in places where you're familiar, just to pause and reckon with it. But anyway, so you have it, and I hope you find it useful, and if not, a good tool.
And that they hope to achieve that. And so when we look many years ahead to where we are right now, it is that same premise that in Jackson, Mississippi in 2008, my father decided to run for city council. After a career of over 40 years of being a human rights attorney, representing people for free most of the time, because we were definitely not rich, right? He decided that standing before the court, asking, begging for people to be let out of prison wasn't the only way that we organized and got our self-determination. It was after many years of engaging in that he decided to run for city council, and he won. It was then after that period of time that people throughout Jackson, Mississippi begged him to run for mayor. And it was at that time that he won 88% of the vote in 2013 and became mayor of the city of Jackson, Mississippi. And that was our first victory. One of the most revolutionary mayors of your time, right? And in his short 7 months of being mayor, he brought together a city that had for a long time been divided. For a long time been divided. But not only did he bring together a city, he really began to help people understand the idea of self-determination, the idea of saving ourselves. See, when Katrina happened in 2005, we learned a very good lesson. What we learned during Katrina is that, yeah, we talked a lot of theory, right? We talked a lot about, being able to create self-determination and build government that would actually take care of the people's needs. But what we realized is that we didn't have the resources, we didn't have the capacity, and we hadn't actually began to experiment to see if we could actually make it happen. And so when Katrina happened, we found ourselves in a very bad, dire situation. And we said that we would never allow that to happen again. What we also realized is that we consistently were acting from an elitist mindset, kept thinking that we had all the answers, and that the people that we were supposedly a part of, the people that we were supposedly saving, right, that they needed our guidance. But what we learned during Katrina is that actually guidance absolutely must, in any circumstance, come from the most impacted, from the people. And so what we did was we began to institute people's assemblies throughout Jackson so that those people's assemblies could guide and challenge us to determine what laws, what issues, what ways of governing, what ways of infrastructure development we needed to take on to actually see development in our city, right? So it was actually taking direction from the people and no longer using this mindset that, oh, I'm the great organizer, you guys come and follow me. No, we follow them, right? And understanding that. And sometimes we are them and recognizing that as well, right? So when Katrina happened, we recognized that. And so when it was time to run in 2013, and when we won and when we got into office in 2013, we understood still that the most important aspect of any administration were going to be these people's assemblies, these people's voice, right? For they have to guide government. And so what the people of Jackson, Mississippi told us, and which was really shocking at that time, they said the most important issue for them were potholes, right? Potholes. Not raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour, it was potholes. Not making sure that people were kept out of prison, it was potholes. Over and over and over again, whatever community you went into, whatever side of town you went into, whether it was the rich or poor, wherever you were, potholes was the common issue. And so, and what that was, and what we realized is that, see, we were too smart for our own good, right? Because it was those potholes, it was bridging pothole to pothole that helped us get to a place where people could understand self-determination. See, for them, every time you hit a pothole, right? Every time you hit a pothole, your car got destroyed, right? So you spent more money fixing that car every single time, right? So your car began to deteriorate, you kept fixing it, made you late to work or having to need a ride, right? So it messed up your money that's coming into your household, which messed up your rent or your ability to pay your water bill. But most importantly, what else did potholes mean? It meant that under that ground that something was going wrong because the streets kept on getting fixed and kept breaking all at the same time, right? So it let us know that we also had a piping issue, that something wasn't right with our infrastructure. See, we took direction from the people and we learned valuable lessons. And we learned how to figure out how to truly build true community power. What that led to was the people of Jackson, Mississippi, saying that, you know what? We realize the problem now, and now we're ready to tax ourselves. I'm not lying. The people of Jackson, Mississippi decided that they were going to tax themselves to fix our billion-dollar infrastructure problem. So they instituted and voted on a 1% sales tax. A 1% sales tax that would allow for the city to have revenue to go towards fixing this infrastructure problem. Because we have a huge infrastructure problem in Jackson, Mississippi. 15 minutes. And so I say all of that to say that sometimes, and not just sometimes, all the time, we have to remember that we must take direction from our people. And we have to remember that we too are community and we do not have all the answers. So as my brother in a couple of weeks will sit up there in the mayor's office, he might sit in that space. But what we tell the people of Jackson is that when he became mayor, you became mayor, right? And so it's not about what he says. It's about engaging you in the process to create the solutions that we all need. For we are all community. You just chose him to stand up front to be that spokesperson. And so I ask you to consider electoral politics in your process. We're here for that. But I most importantly ask you, in all that you do, remember to always place the voice, the will, and the want of the people first, even when you do not agree. Because let me tell you, we ain't agree on taxing ourselves. But we did it because the people did it. So thank you. I appreciate you. I love you. And let love guide all that we do. Free the land, free the land, free the land.